The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today, great to have Pete Morgan joining me. How are you, Pete?
Thank you. Really good, thanks. Excited to catch up with you.
Yeah, well, look, this is great. Your first time on the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and look, maybe a little bit of an introduction about yourself, where you fit into this sort of big wide world of tech, innovation, and farming in your case, which I'm really excited actually to really drill in and understand more, particularly the dairy world that you're, most involved in, and the role of tech and innovation and Kiwi ingenuity and how it all comes together, and where it's heading. But a little bit of an overview from yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, involvement with tech, it kind of feels like being part of the human race. You're immediately immersed in it regardless. So, but certainly within farming, it's just extraordinary. In the last 10, but particularly 5 years, we've seen a huge growth in uptake. Yes, so Anne and I farm in the South Waikato. We've got a beautiful rolling 265 hectare dairy farm, calved down 500 or 600 cows and all young stock on, and amazing team of 3 people on the farm working with me. Came through a pretty traditional, what I think is traditional now. A lot of people might not. That grew up South Auckland, studied at Massey, met Anne there. She was doing vet, and then travelled the world, came back, worked in research, worked for what's now is Dairy NZ and AgResearch. And then, as with a lot of farmers, got to the key stages of life when just planning, growing up stuff, and farming kind of ticked the box, even though we've both been exposed to it lots and worked and studied. Because there's a bit of a lifestyle choice. Once you commit, if you want to do it properly, you completely commit. And then, so I had a really good background, family background with a bit of tech, university, obviously. But dairy farming itself is immersed in a lot of data and analysis, and is absolutely ripe for even really simple fundamental technology. I mean, just the development of Excel, for example, just ballooned, as I'm sure it did for you, of just the ability to just run so many things anyone could. Then everything went from there. And we've got a whole host of technology we've always used, some of it incredibly simple, like the use of tail paint, which has got to be one of the simplest things you can think of, but just completely revolutionized what we do, right through to some pretty cool stuff now.
Wow. Okay. Well, looking forward to delving into that. Before we dive in, of course, a big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Look, there's a whole lot of areas, and just for background, sometimes there's an interesting way that we met, and
that's right. We got to meet on an airplane of all things. I was coming back from Thailand. You were coming back from
India, Singapore. So so that was probably I don't know, some weeks back anyway, and great that we were able to find the right timing to get together. And I know you contribute to a range of media, whether it's TVNZ Breakfast and things in the Herald and so on. But real privilege to have you joining us on the show, and to maybe delve in a little bit deeper, and definitely with that tech focus. One of the things when we were talking before the show, that I just found fascinating was how you talked about collaboration and transparency within
our culture.
Within the New Zealand sort of farming community, and how that culture is and how it differs to other parts of the world. Because I think that sort of sets a scene for some of the innovation that we've seen coming out of New Zealand, and no doubt some of the things that are sort of coming down the pike as well.
Yeah. And you're right. It's a really important foundation for getting your head around how it all works. When people come to the farm, if you come down and spend a day on the farm with me, or we have quite a few quite big groups that we just engage with, come whoever from business circles, science, or wherever, or a lot of overseas groups. I do 2 things to start with. One is I show on a whiteboard, or I scratch in the dirt, the seasonal supply and demand curves of our pasture throughout the country, and then how we map over top of it, New Zealand, what the animals need by our calving dates and other things. And it enables us to run these beautifully simple, harmonious with whatever the climate is doing in that region, and low cost and pasture based. So once people get that aspect, they can understand our systems. But just as important is our history, 150 years of agriculture, but exclusively exporting pretty much the vast majority. My industry, we still export 97% of what we make. And we pretty much always have. As a result, it means that for that reason and the need from a simple virgin country coming up through and developing land, we needed to collaborate in our, not just our development, but our research and extension and universities. Also, our competition was never with each other as farmers. So it became expedient for all of us to fund the research through levies, educate ourselves, share ideas, and we share everything. There's like my neighbors and everyone else in the industry can find out pretty much everything about each other, our business, our policies, our experiences, our finance. We share all of those, our budgets. We standardize them and put them into a really significant base called Dairy Base, which we can then go and query anything to do if we want to find benchmarks.
Wow.
And it's very cool. You're right, it's not normal around most of the world.
So when you talk about that financial transparency, I mean, to what sort of level? If I was, curious around your farm, maybe I'm wondering how my own farm's doing, or I'm thinking about investing in your farm or in other farms in the area.
Yep.
What data is actually are you sharing?
Yep. So 30 seconds on the web, put in my name and put in farming, or particularly put in Dairy NZ, who create the biggest database of farm performance. And we have a whole number of case study farms throughout the country. We're one of them. And you can put up everything. Sort of 6, 7, 8 years, I think might be now, of financial reports, standardized, but even more importantly, the policies behind them and how we've managed what we call step change, which is quite a big program going on, is how we actually step through change because of changing the economy, your own stage of career or life, and then adaptation around regulations, which we might talk about a bit later, freshwater farm plans that are rolling out, and of course the main event coming, which is our emissions and carbon. And we have lots of field days. My wife jokes that people say gossiping like old women. There's nothing like gossiping like farmers when we get us together. Honestly, it's even walking down the main street, it's like 2 5-year-olds just kind of gravitating to each other, and you have to tear them apart because we've got so much in common. But culturally, we've normalised that. But I see it throughout New Zealand, very egalitarian on everything, and I know aspects of it potentially negative, but most of it is nice. It's a good thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, looking at the role of technology within the farm world, maybe a bit of an overview of kind of what that looks like, where the technology sits. Obviously it's not all information technology. There's ranges of technology. We're talking about paint on tails and
I know
and so on. So walk us through some of these things.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about dairy farming is it's a strong industry with stability, and that creates one of the main things that you'd understand in the tech world is confidence. As soon as you've got that, you will attract solid research and funding and capital and confidence in the future. So with that backbone, and then second thing is intensity of data. So we have enough there coming through. We've got a whole lot of KPIs through our main performance and inputs that are very standardized, and everyone understands them. We speak the same language. On the other hand, and we've got the willingness to work together. Okay, so those are the great ingredients for the recipe. But when it comes to the baking, it's not so easy because we've got huge complexities because we're dealing with a food industry. So if you talk, I might talk as a dairy farmer, I am in the food industry first and foremost. My staff speak that language, we all do, and therefore we're tied to what the markets and what the tariffs and what the reality and the politics and the commercial realities of everything else to do with that. Throw on top of that climatic change, and you're dealing with a biological system that has so many moving bits that is really a black box, where it really, really is. And we've got inputs and we've got an output, a fair chunk of it right down to go as deep as you want, understanding the cow and the way she works, physiologically, behaviorally, let alone soils and all the complexities around the flora and fauna. it's incredible complexity, and it's very difficult to completely control it. Therefore, we need something better in the black box, because constraints in terms of inflation, labor shortage, and changing in our demographics as farmers, and then conversely, further outwards, we've got volatility in markets and consumer preferences changing, and then climate volatility. So all those things mean we've got to wrestle control. We're at the reasonably extreme end with what we are doing, although there's more than 250,000 farmers managing virtual management farm systems like we're doing now. But I often say that dairy farmers are kind of playing catch up. If you take the cropping industry, they have had phenomenal optimization programs using some brilliant modeling and algorithms. They've got use of GPS technology for super improvements in efficiency and seed placement, and fertilizer reduction and adaptations to minimize costs and create a lot more stability. We have been victims of our success, that with our beautiful, simple systems, with that supply and demand curves and just managing it by the seat of our pants well with experience. We've been really robust till now, but we seriously need to play some catch up for those reasons I just said. So we were ripe for it to come in. We've got some salient lessons as well. It's always easier to learn from someone else's. And we've got the saying, of course, second mouse gets the cheese. So we try and make sure that there's plenty of second, third mice along to learn from each other and pick up the first mouse. So, for example, if you go onto the farm, you look at the most intense part of the whole system is the milking. Okay, twice a day, you've got 2 or 3 hours of very intense changing cups and monitoring the animals and doing things. So you would think that the first place to actually go in is just completely do a big tech dump in there. Lots of parts of the world have done it. The US, even more so in Europe, a huge number of robotic milking systems.
And they exist in New Zealand too, don't they?
They do, absolutely, yeah. And Delaval and Lely have both got a big presence in New Zealand, and they work brilliantly well. They're we've had neighbours with them, and except for one thing, has stopped them from growing more than just a basic number in New Zealand. I understand it's relatively stable, and that is they don't work in the bigger picture, which is once you if you look at it functionally, right there, it works beautifully. These animals come and go, and it's seamless. But the bigger picture is it's got to be sustainable on every other front. And whenever I talk about sustainability, because we're doing a lot of environmental work in our farm and outside, the most important thing to be sustainable is you and your business and your performance and your profitability. If you don't have that and a confidence that it'll stay like that, the rest of it's just not going to work. And I defend that vehemently when we have groups who want to talk about our sustainability work, but we actually start with that and then build out from that. Those robotics have not been sustainable on a lot of farms because they didn't address the real engine of our system, which is the ability to seamlessly work with the animals, the environment, the pasture that we grow. In the pasture, your ability to grow and utilize it accounts for 85% of our return within the farm system.
Wow.
Just on that ability. So
85%.
it's completely about that. And when you come onto a farm and look at everything they're doing, it's that farmer's ability, either using technology or their experience with some basic measurements, to make really good quality decisions every day on the most fundamental thing is how much area am I going to give these girls each day and how much feed will they get. That decides it pretty much. And so the main differences were actually being made outside. And this is where technology like Halter, that Craig Piggott, who you've had on the show before, just through part genius and mostly incredible amount of work and risk and managed to address, which was genius. I mean, most of us, by that stage, I'd been farming for 15 years and really, really got the pasture proposition. And so the technology we were adapting to, if you came into my farm, and you actually still can up to about a week ago when we've done some seriously cool tech within the cowshed, was the cowshed was no different to what it was 30 years ago. And one of my 2 cowsheds is still the same as it was 50 years ago. Because it's simple, robust. It's got 3 electric motors, and the rest of it super low cost and robust. But outside that, the use of GPS technology, absolute game changer for us. The ability to use of satellites, for you to manage your pasture well, be able to accurately assess exactly how much is there and understand it intimately. And we're really lucky that on the near infrared end of the spectrum, the satellites are able to very accurately pick up the quantity of feed, and then through some crazy cool machine learning, Halter have run with that and then created a whole lot of other different dimensions to that in terms of being able to model and understand and then predict and help us manage. And that technology was originally developed, the satellite stuff, for understanding deforestation and rainforests, where you'd have selective logging in the Amazon and that, which was hard to tell just visually.
Yeah.
But when they looked at the biomass density, which is what near infrared measures through chlorophyll, they were able to pick up that these things are being taken out. And so it was really interesting development there. And then integrating with our databases, and then being able to make better decisions on a clunky, relatively manual basis meant that we knew manually what we needed to do, but couldn't see how we could scale it up, because we had the next limiting factors, which was us and our time, and our ability to communicate to staff exactly what needs to be done. And their progress was always going to be a 5 or 10 year track to build up the same experience with us. With a reduction in the number of people and their different motivations of each generation, they're not only less of them now, significantly less of those people coming in, and even the career changes we were talking about earlier that are coming in that are making up a significant proportion. They want a very different pathway, so they're not going to spend 5 or 10 years being the boy or the girl.
Because they've come in from another career, they've changed into farming, and they're ready just to put their foot down and get rolling. And so they want to draw on the best of tech and innovation that's available.
They do. And they challenge, which is wonderful, really good. It's really easy to get stuck in farming again with your success in relatively blinkered view of not only what you're doing, but what is possible. And for them to come in and say, there's got to be a better way of actually doing this. So they're always building better mousetraps which is really stimulating. So again, if you add that element, the constraints, you add the type of people who are creating these discussions, and then you have this flat structure in New Zealand, many organisations that have developed a lot of the tech that's particularly what they call the wearables. So we've got collars and ear tags and rumen boluses, which will measure rumen pH and temperature and a whole lot of dynamic things that can then communicate at the cowshed back out.
And what does that tell you for those that aren't familiar working with cattle?
Yeah. So a cow is part of a type of species called ruminants. So ruminants will, by definition, have a rumen, which is their second of 4 stomachs, which is evolutionarily phenomenally unique. It will do something that no animal can do, and that is provide the right environment to digest cellulose, which is completely indigestible to anything, including us. It just goes straight through you as fiber. And they can do it. Well, they actually outsource it. They actually get the rumen bacteria to do it for them. So we've got these billions and billions of bacteria to do it. And so how that actually is managed is part of the fine art of grazing management, but we never get to see what's happening inside. So a rumen bolus, it's a thing about this big that has this,
what are we talking about? 7 centimeters long or so?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, about the length of your hand. And they swallow it quite easily. It sits in there, and then it has a radio frequency that will it'll collect data and then communicate back to a simple receiver in the cowshed.
Wow.
And then able to make really good decisions on how well the animals, the biochemistry of what's going on inside the rumen.
How hard is it to get them to swallow one of these things?
It's pretty easy. Our cows are, dairy cows are handled really well. I would not want to try it on some angry Hereford cow. She would have you in the beef industry. No, my girls they're very, very calm. Funny thing, they're
and so do you have those with, like, does every cow have one of those, or is that something?
This is only
selected. Something just a very small selected number that give you that sort of feedback on.
Yeah. Well, a selected number of farmers use it,
right?
And they tend to be quite high input ones that are more aligned with feedlot systems that we're using overseas. And so New Zealand has a very few of those. There'd be only a few % at that end, or ones that have specific feed types or issues. The vast majority of us have stock standard pasture-based feeding systems, and we all calve in the spring, mainly to tie in with that synchrony of the supply and demand curves. And
so you get to manage and control that.
You get to manage and control it through technology like that, which is very cool, and that will only carry on increasing. And then the other range of tech that, in terms of the cow, is around measuring temperature, motion, and extrapolating from that behavior, which is where the machine learning comes in. And Halter put, just like all the companies, have put a huge amount of effort to turn something that is a movement in 3 dimension into a whole range of behavior discussions. So those cows I was showing you, those dots on my map, which are the live view.
We were looking at your smartphone and looking at the Halter app earlier as the cows were coming into milk, right?
That's right. So watching them leave the paddock, and it's amazing to be in Auckland and have this going on down on the farm in the South Waikato, and just be able to tie it in. I mean, when I was overseas, right through the day, you'd be able to keep checking in and just be aware, just as if you were right there. But any of those cows I can touch on and get a live feed of sort of every 30-minute increments of exactly what her behavior is, how she's walking and sleeping and eating and moving, and then other things to do that can be extrapolated from that, because that's just movement in 3 dimensions.
Yep.
When they literally had these guys sitting on deck chairs, often in the pouring rain, a coat over them and a laptop, watching cows, wearing collars, and then every time they did something, they would press a button. Machine learning works.
Wow.
And then very quickly the technology goes, I got this.
I know what that is.
You go inside, get dry.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It's really cool. Now,
that was the advantage of being involved early. I got to see all those crazy early cowboy days as well.
Yeah. Now, I guess sort of an aspect that, some of us might not sort of understand, at least, in too much detail, is what is the business of being a dairy farmer kind of look like, in terms of, what are the things that sort of, make a difference?
Yep.
In terms of output, in terms of, because I guess as dairy, is the milk really your only revenue source? Are there other things that sort of fit in there? And how does that vary? And
right.
and those sorts of things. Just it certainly helps me anyway to understand that sort of business side of it, to see how these other elements kind of fit together. Yeah,
because you do need a feel for to how the business is structured and functions, to really understand then why we do some of the things we do, why that I put significant amount of money every year into lease some technology to make a difference. So if you fan right out, we've got the land and we pay a significant amount for it, and then the animals make up about 15% of the equity we tend to have tied up. So it's significant. We make a choice for the use of the land depending on where you are in the country, and dairy farming on any moderate to easier land has a far higher return. And if you take my pasture matching with demand, your optimization that you're after to minimize costs, even productivity, and manage risk, you have those cows calving at the right time and then milking while their requirements are like 3 times what they need when they're not milking. So therefore, when they're all milking, you're going to have that happen during the highest growth period of the year. And then once we get to autumn and the grass slows down, we stop milking them for the winter. We only consume a % of all the milk we make in New Zealand. We export everything else. So
right, and that's they sort of leaning towards a powdered product.
It is, yes. So commodities versus value added. So the commodities still make up about 50 or 60%. And of that, yes, we've got whole milk powder, skim milk powder, butter, cheese, and then a whole lot of specialty products, which we do extremely well. And whilst they might not have the returns per ton that are value added, part of the problem is, from an engineering point of view, is our peak production is such a big volume that you could not build factories for all the value-added products when all you do is have them for a couple of months of the year.
Right. Okay. So what? Yeah. Well, what happens in terms how and so are different farms sort of operating on quite different schedules and so on? How does that?
Nope.
How does
So
that work?
every farm does its own thing.
Yeah.
You do your whatever your area, you do what your thing, and then the factories themselves have to work around that. So as you go through the country, though, Northland will carve earlier. Will have a different profile to Waikato, to Canterbury, to Southland. Yep.
So it depends on the weather and
it does,
and
the
light.
climate, and it's right, and when spring comes. So the next stage then is, yes, almost all our income is from milk production. So maybe about 5-10 at the most would come from stock sales. Stock. So yeah, it's completely a lot of eggs in one basket. And we do it very well compared to most countries where you'll have mixed operations. You'll have some beef and you'll have some cropping side. We tend to be a lot more pure in what we do, particularly because it actually is the best use of the land, is the optimum, and it's quite consuming. So if you do have something else within the farm, it's likely to be distracting from your ability to actually achieve the primary thing. So therefore, the income is relatively seasonal. So then your business structure needs to be very cognizant of cash flow. Our ability to budget ahead and have financial tools and very robust accounting systems is extremely important, because we have such a significant delay between where the major expenditure is and when the income comes in. On that, we're supplying Fonterra, like the 80% of the industry. And when you get to the end of each season, our seasons go June to June, there is still up to another 20% that hasn't been paid out, that they'll wait till the next October until all the markets settle out and all the exchanges and everything for us to then know what we'll finally get. So we call them retro payments. So for us to be able to cash flow manage that has been super important. And the technology around our accounting is important. And as you'll see in a minute, our ability to actually bring all these worlds together, how our animals are behaving and performing and producing, our pastures and our crops, what the markets are doing, whether we forward fix or use any of those industry tools to create stability. All of those things have to filter down to measuring performance, but also how we actually drive performance. And so one of the exciting things happening with technology is convergence. And we've got so much siloed information and processes that it still feels like, as a farmer, I'm having to use a significant degree of judgment on what I should be doing with these different parts of the business.
Gotcha.
When it's an optimization program, if you could actually have the data, have this different data sources coming in from the different technology that we have everywhere, and more of that. Having more data doesn't actually make your life significantly easier quite often. So as you well understand. But it's exciting, though, having all that potential building up. But it's typical, isn't it, that you don't have everything move at the same time. You'll have a overblow here and data, and then you'll have some startup go, actually, I can fill that space, and start joining the dots together.
Things like the wearables, these Internet of Things.
IoT.
We've got so much better connectivity now, haven't we?
We do.
The IoT devices, satellite coverage for those that are out in the absolute wops where nothing can reach them in terms of traditional communication.
And we've had to skip all of that. You must have seen that in overseas, where they've just forget about any infrastructure. They've just gone straight to satellite for developing any tech. And definitely for farming. We've got a significant proportion in New Zealand that still doesn't have great coverage, but and so you get these companies. So we've got devices. Well, on the farm, then we've got complete coverage of the whole farm with LoRa.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And it's just that And it makes me realize, kind of upended the way I actually think about how I think about the farm now, that we've got the complete coverage. And at the moment, we've got the location, the geolocation of every animal, and we can manage them any way we want. We have as many mobs, we can contain them in any, what we call a break, so an area where they get allocated exactly what they need of the feed and crop. We can move them anywhere to any other break, any other paddock, or to the cowshed for milking. And ultimately, this sort of tech, and this is where we talk about virtual management, it will tell you where they are, it will allow you to keep them where you want, move them where you want, and it will tell you how they're doing. Their reproductive cycle, their health, their behavior, and all of that. And those are the things it does. But they're pretty fundamental. I mean, you could do that manually. And we have historically, especially when we had smaller herds. When I started, after I did the traveling and everything and started off on this farm, I was actually still working in Hamilton in research, and this farmer banged on the door. We were renting a cottage. Anne was a vet in the local town, and we were just in the halfway point on this farm. And his farm worker had shot through. It was a Saturday morning. House had cleared out. He was only 15. And so he said, "Can you help me out for the weekend?" And just got on so well with him. And by Monday, he offered me a job. And 2 weeks later, I left and went farming.
Wow.
But there was 120 cows.
Yeah,
and I knew them all, had no motorbike, could walk, you'd understand them. A cow would flutter her eyes, knew she was on heat, ready for mating. And you saw a cow droop an eyelid, you knew she was unwell. But by virtue of scale and us wanting to do a better and better job, we needed something to do that more reliably and better. And so it's weird for me because on one hand, the best technology is so enabling, but it does something so fundamental and basic in tuning into the reality at the bottom level, but can then draw out from that just an insane number of things for any farm system. These hugely steep countries that have all sorts of erosion and environmental issues and labor and infrastructure. It's fine. It basically flattens the whole farm. You can do what you want, right through to some of these high-performing peat farms in the Waikato, intensive 5,000 cow farms in the Canterbury, or I know a guy with 100 cows just wants to have a seamless way of managing the farm, all through some really basic in terms of what it's actually trying to achieve. It does it through an insanely complicated way. And then we've got the whole farm covered with LoRa, which...
So LoRa, for those that aren't familiar, it's an Internet of Things, communications technology. I guess it's, in our homes and offices, we have Wi-Fi. On the farm, you have LoRa, right?
That's right. Exactly. So it's like a Wi-Fi, quite right. But I always think of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's the opposite of what my cell phone does. With 4 and 5G, you've got this big pipeline with just this huge amount of data, but it can only talk to my phone. Whereas my understanding with IoT devices and something like LoRa, if you've got good coverage, you can have just a ridiculous number of these things. But all they need to do is send a little ping. They're not sending
tiny bits of information effectively.
Yeah. So they're both ends of the spectrum. And together, when people say IoT is a big deal in the future, that's the kind of area that I'm thinking. So farms have, and this is talking further ahead, there's a lot of stuff we haven't covered that we're already doing with tech, but having that vision ahead of where it needs to go. And this is my role in communication and with conferences and articles, and particularly talking to big groups on the farm that come from all sorts of backgrounds, want to help us navigate mindfully and purposefully towards wherever we're going, rather than slightly haphazard. And we take pretty seriously our responsibility in farming, of particularly dairy, of in order to earn the right to critique anything, you need to have been a part of the conversation, be constructive, and have been there along the way to give advice. And so having full LoRa coverage over the whole farm, there is just, I tell you what, I've got several decades of Christmas lists for Santa in terms of what potentially could be put on. So things like soil probes across the farm, which could measure soil moisture, soil pH, nutrient levels, effort levels, biological activity, which, as you network those together, would have a phenomenal influence on not just performance, but there's a huge number of environmental factors. And then working right through to, again, the main act coming up, which is addressing our emissions. And then every vehicle, every water pipe in terms of flow rate, and then networking all of those together with a more fine-tuned understanding and management of the feed and pastures. And then all of those things connected, not only emissions to environment, but to groundwater and then our waterways. They're all very closely connected, and indirectly then through to biodiversity, which is something that we realise for a whole lot of reasons are extremely important. Yep. So those things are all doable by a whole lot of $1 devices that could be put here and there eventually. We just need, So I know that organisations like Halter, and I'm sure the other ones around in the similar space, are positioning themselves, get their own business right, but they actually are providing a platform that a lot of other industries will start talking to them, a lot of third party, which that really excites me because, I mean, for me, Halter and all of the other companies are sort of a third party for me. So they're part of my sort of scope 3. So that's exciting, and it's really fun being a part of those conversations, particularly as they then blend in the other considerations of sustainably keeping a strong business, and of those other businesses connected to me. I've got a vested interest in them staying robustly strong, and then going forward, how it relates to the roles of people. We've seen a huge difference as we no longer are going to get cows and putting up electric fences and that. The immediate response is a good example, Paul. Within 6 months, we took out 25% of the hours. We're generally working 58, 60 hours. This is average for my staff. And me, upwards of 100 per week, that we're now just reliably at 44, which is huge.
Wow.
But that's only part of it, because my staff love doing what they're doing. But much more significant is things, and this is a bit of a consequence I didn't realise would be this bigger deal, is their complete role now. That when they start, on day one, I'll have them out, show them how we allocate feed, manage the animals, move them, and then from day 2, they are doing it themselves. And they get to experience what it's like to be sort of at least 5 years in, and in the driving seat, with me hand hovering over the handbrake and all of that, like teaching my daughter to drive, but still the same experience. And then that not only gives them the experience, but gives them this kind of feeling of what it's like to move forward. And this is what we have to do for our people. We talked before about those career changes, and most of that generation really don't want to be mucking around. So, and right or wrong, they're right, because if we can't provide that, they won't come and work for us. So they do get the last say. So there are concepts like that it's not just about saving the time. We're creating a whole new environment, responsibility, pathway ahead for them, because we're so short of them. Anyone who's keen will have Petra, who's my farm manager, is an extraordinary example, in her mid-20s, and is absolutely rocketing ahead with just loving the control. And then the last thing is a huge change in mindset. Because in the past, this was our approach to the day, and a lot of business, I mean, whenever we have people from other businesses, all my mates come to the farm, you start off thinking that they're running a building company in Auckland and I'm on a dairy farm, got nothing to do with each other. And within like an hour, like our Venn diagrams completely overlap of everything. But for us, around people and pathways, that by having them more productive, and then in a driving seat more, we can work strategically more, working on outcomes. So each week we will meet and work out what our main outcomes of the week are, and then their job is just to go and make it happen. It doesn't matter how complex it is. Now we can do it, and it will align to the strategy. And everything they do is with a lot more intention. Historically on farm, all we ever did was, through necessity, we had a finite amount of time. So outside the milkings, you'd have like 4 to 5 hours a day to get other stuff done. You'd have a certain number of electric fences and standards that you needed to subdivide paddocks, and you had a tractor and a dog maybe, and then a whole lot of animals, and as minimal mobs. You try and keep it as simple as possible, and then we would get whatever we could done in the day. And everything beyond that, that's it. Got tomorrow, but that's all I could get done. So we've completely upended that and go, we'd normally run 3 mobs. We've had like up to 11. We've got 5, 6 at the moment, and you've got no constraints there. We've taken fences out.
This is the technology just lets you group your cows in a completely different way rather than the traditional sort of, running big mob fences and letting a mob cows through one gate and
Yep, that's right. With a lot of consequence because of that, you end up playing to the average. So why would I want to split mobs? Just because the groups start. I've got 2 and 3-year-olds together, which are it's like intermediate school. They need to be kept together. They're just not ready for the rough and tumble of high school. And all the rest of the older girls, they're in there and they mean business. And then we've got all our young stock, our calves, are like primary school. They're together. But even them, if when we weigh them, which we do regularly, we can just reshuffle the mobs to adapt to. They have blue periods. They may not perform well. And one of the first things you can do is actually adapt around them. So those are the kind of outcomes that we identify we want. And then you can make it happen. It's extraordinary. It's quite liberating until you start thinking, once I take away these constraints, one mob's easy to make decisions around. We've taken fences out. We've taken 65% of them out because you have this bigger block of land now that you can subdivide and move the animals. So every break anyone draws, so a break is where we put electric fence up and restrict where the animals were. We now on the phone just draw where you want. You've already got
that, and then because they've got the
collar on, when they step over that, it'll tell them, it'll beep at them and say not to, and they'll stay there. And we can move them.
And that's all it takes is just a beep, a little nudge.
They completely understand it.
There's no electric shock treatment here.
Well, during the training phase, they have a tiny one, but it can only be used, and it is only used after a period of time where the animal has demonstrated it completely understands what it's doing, so that it then willfully puts itself in a situation where the pulse is used to reinforce a signal that they had already understood and they had chosen not to.
Yeah.
And then what you'll see is only those who are the naughtiest, those that are big and pushy and that, they'll go over it, and you'll see them get a little pulse and they'll put their head up and go, I knew that was coming, and then they'll quietly walk back to the break. It's extraordinary. A complete change in animal behavior. The whole mob, the whole farm of now 3 years, many thousands of moves, not once by us. You would think they'd become a bit more wild because you're no longer there getting them and around them. A complete opposite. Wow. You come through the cows, they're super chilled out. You become as threatening as a tree. It mean nothing to them. And so we can go up to most of them. If you spread out the behaviors and look at those that were always really scatty and those that were super pets that were following you around like wet lambs, they have all become more chilled, and both tail ends have come in. So those that were looking to you for endorsement have actually become more cow. Those that were a bit more scatty have actually just become more chilled. So, and there's a whole lot of dimensions there as we move from animal welfare, which we've achieved for quite a while in our industry. We've got really robust measures of it, still working to be better and better, to a new way of thinking with the technology that can start collecting other dimensions to behavior. So let's say, for example, social grouping, that we know who normally hangs with who, normally when they're well. And it'll be to do with age and size and a dominance hierarchy, which is really strict. So with technology that can actually go in and understand that hierarchy and who's normally with who, if that changes, it will be because the animal is experiencing something different. If she's unwell, if there's a real disruption. And so why does that matter? It matters for us as farmers. We farm because we really care about our animals. Our staff even more so from that generation. We've got a whole lot of layers of compliance that are becoming more and more attuned, particularly around environment and animal welfare. Our markets really care about it. So our markets are made up of our consumers at the end who are consuming the products, but we also have, before them, we have some significant big organizations we sell into, Parmalat and Nestlé's and the likes. And they have made significant statements in terms of where they're going. In terms of emissions, they've all come out with 2030 targets, like Fonterra has just done with a 30% reduction of its scope 3. And a lot of them are heading towards zero very fast, but as well as around animal behavior and animal welfare and well-being. So it's expedient for us on lots of levels. And so to be able to adapt around that, but it's phenomenally complex trying to get it to understand the technology, but it's getting there very fast, again, through some really cool applications and some very, very smart people.
And how's that the journey going, from an environmental perspective? And we're I don't think anybody wants to see sort of, climate change, go down the worst tracks that we've heard about.
Absolutely not.
But on the flip side, most of us don't want to make too many kind of big changes to how we live. So
Quite right.
There's obviously a fair bit of a load that's on our farmers to innovate and I guess figure out how to reduce emissions.
That's right.
Without killing off an important sector.
Yeah, the goose that lays the golden egg. That's right. And I mean, on one hand, we need to carry that load because our methane emissions have a very significant impact on our total emissions, and we know that we are the major role there with ruminant animals. On the other hand, we're outside with our job. We know about climate. We know about weather. We collect records. I know that in the last 5-6 years, I've had 3 of the driest in my career, and last year was the wettest in my career. So whenever you see those floods and typhoons and everything that people are saying this is the record for that country, well, we're having plenty of them. You're right that 1.5 degrees, it would be incredible if we managed to hold on to that. But even that is going to take an extreme measure for us. And 2 degrees beyond, scary territory. That hockey stick is it's a stick for a reason. It's gonna hit us hard if we don't manage to. And our industry is a slow ship to turn because of the size and shape and the way it's actually structured. But within it, the vast majority of us are well on track. So, for example, our compliance around our farm environment plans that we started almost 10 years ago, all the waterways fenced, and then the basic measures of what we were doing on use of effluent and nutrients and animals, at least recording, at least get used to things. And then the Know Your Number was an amazing campaign where we actually said, at the very least, just know what your emissions level is. So I know I produce 8.2 tonnes per hectare on my farm. And Fonterra's second issue is, of course, with emissions and intensity, which is how much is around each product. And then we've now just rolling out, well, my region is going to be the first one to roll out the freshwater farm plans. So these are much more detailed understanding of environmental management. I tend not to use environmental management because I don't manage my environment. Environment is everything. So the reality is it's actually resource management. So the primary resources that I've got and how I understand them, how I manage the risks around them, and then what plans I've got ahead. So those resources are, of course, my soil, my infrastructure, my animals, my water, my atmosphere around me. And so all of those things, the farm environment plans are structured beautifully to enable us to show an understanding of it, understanding what the risks are, talk about our current management, and then what our management plans are ahead, and then make us accountable for those. We've already got the majority done. This is a little bit like moving from animal welfare, the minimal achievement of the 5 freedoms that the animals have entrenched in law, to actually animal well-being, is how do we actually absolutely enhance as much as possible every bit of it. So I've got this dream ahead where, because our ability to use technology to measure so many of these things and have incredible storage and ability to manipulate it in the cloud, is that within a few years I need us to be at the point where external auditing, which we have a lot of, and we are going to have more of it. There's some serious blockchain opportunities for us to actually connect inextricably to what we're doing. But at the moment, the ultimate is that we've got a fair bit of auditing and compliance, but for it to happen with convergence organically outside me, this data already exists with all of the main companies that I deal with Fonterra and LIC and Balance, so for agri-nutrients, for animal performance, for product, for milk quality. And at the moment, that comes to me and I have to shuffle it and then send it to 4 different reporting, which really takes up a lot of time and energy. And you'll see this is part of the reason you'll see some kickback from farmers as to what's going on.
Yeah.
But the ultimate for me is once a year, it comes out and it captures what we require for our markets and government compliance. And then 2 other things. I want it to be able to capture completely the full experience of every animal for every moment it's with me. And secondly, to capture the full experience of every square meter of land and water that is within my scope 1, and have that link through to the scope 3, which is, of course, all the external emissions upstream and downstream. That completely can be done. And for us, particularly as an export country, is gold. We already experience a significant premium for what we do and how we do it. And this is just a potential where it's a win-win across everybody, and particularly our consumers and their trust in what we do.
So ultimately, I guess that data comes together. I mean, along the way, I guess all of the data you're drawing on allows you to address issues
It does.
amongst individual cows. But ultimately, you end up with sort of data, and I mean, can you put it down to a happiness score of
absolutely.
how happy the cows are? Can you put that on a bottle of milk and say, we've got this is New Zealand milk, and our cows have a happiness score of
it's true
4.6 out of 5 or whatever.
You're onto it. Yeah, that's absolutely how it needs to be. And this is when I say a single metric, that's pretty much exactly what I'm talking about. And in Shanghai, on that bottle of flavoured milk, that someone scans a Q code and they get a live feed into the map that you just saw of my farm, and to be able to touch a couple of things, not move my cows, but at least go in and then go and pick any time of the year.
Okay,
yeah, exactly. And then look at the heat maps. We've already got heat maps for all of the movement of animals through the year. I can pick any period and show where they were for however many hours. And it's a beautiful thing to actually go through and look at where they spend time. Enables me to manage around heat tolerance, which is something that we are having to address more and more and more. In my time in Thailand, working with the farmers over there, was something that was very, very important. Important from a productivity rather than a welfare, but it's something that we're going to need to address more and more. So you can see in all of this, and if you throw law in as well, the opportunity for third parties to just be in the game there from a technology. There is just
all that data.
There's just so much data, but also opportunities for them to come in and actually put their own devices and actually add value in whatever areas, because we're talking about a very big machine, our industry. And there's something pretty cool about producing food. Honestly, I do get to sleep pretty well at night in that respect. Also take pretty seriously the responsibility for the cows. I mean, they're amazing animals, work really hard for us. And for that, that means a huge amount to us and a huge amount of our pleasure in running the farm. And then without a doubt, the care for the land. When you get to my age, just turned 60, you just get this idea that this finite period that you get to, not to sound cliche, but this finite period you get to look after this land becomes just so much more acute. And therefore the responsibilities that go with that really come into focus. And for us to be doing right by all of that, or doing as right as we can at the moment, but identify where we need to go, thus the reporting that moves more towards some tangible, accountable plans. Yeah. And then bring as many people into the discussion, not with me saying this is what we're doing, we've got there, but so what do you think? Where do you think we should go? What do you care about? And then help them get a bit more grounded. So example, on the animal welfare front, and there's some parallels with people and land and nutrients and environment. One of the big things that people happens to them is a real change when you spend a couple of days on farm and they are getting in the rhythm of the farm, finding out what we really care about. So most common people go away from most farmers go, I didn't actually really realize why you were in this industry and what you care about. But the other thing is actually getting closer to the truth of what's happening. And so the truth for the animals, or for the land and the pasture and that, is going to require a lot more IoT devices and understanding and ability. And then optimization, which is going to be very challenging because it's a complex biological system. For the animals, just on the behavioral side, getting closer to what their truth is quite different. We tend to be quite anthropomorphic, which is understandable. But what really matters is what they're experiencing. And one of the aspects is they live in the present. Most of our suffering goes on as humans in the future. I'm fine today. Tomorrow, if I get a diagnosis that I've got terminal cancer, I've got 6 months to live. Tomorrow, I am completely miserable, even though I'm the same person. Yeah, we do that. Cows do not. Animals do not. And that's not to take anything away from them, but it does then beg the question, what really matters to them is how they exist in the present. And so if I can have a series of presents, which I can put together for Paul Spain's happiness score, that is what will really matter. But it does require people and government and public and that to actually understand that's actually the truth for the animals. And right down to the more challenging part, which is therefore it's that quality and what it really means of all their life rather than the length of it.
Yeah, okay.
So that's an interesting thing that we then...
Fascinating.
And so when we say we're starting to build that vision ahead, there's the kind of discussions you want to go down, and then you rein back, get back to reality right now, but at least let it form your thinking and then the conversations you have with where those responsibilities are. It's a really interesting space. You can see in the cow shed we get quite a bit of thinking time and talking time.
And look, I can see there's a lot more that we could delve into in the future. We've probably already burned through our time for today.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm hoping we'll get another chance to delve into this on another occasion as well. So yeah,
that'd be fantastic.
Been really fascinating, Pete.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Paul.
Really enjoyed it. And I think there's some really important discussions here, and I love this sort of forward-looking sort of future focus that you carry, and the different insights that you've shared with us. So probably a lot more to chat about, but that's been really cool. In terms of where to from here, I think you've given us a little bit of a taste. So, but yeah, I'm just looking at some of the notes here and see there's definitely more we can delve into. But you've given us a great picture on the farm, and I guess some of the key things that are going on, how it all fits together. So really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure, and it'd be great to catch up again sometime. This whole space is moving fast, and we certainly need platforms like what you provide to help us navigate it and make sense and draw, particularly from a technological point of view, all of us together so that we're seeing the same picture.
Yeah, and look, I think sometimes we don't recognise how quickly things are moving. But probably it's obviously it's not just the farming world, but probably every direction we look that things are moving quickly.
Yeah,
and we do need to stop, sort of delve in and make sure we're making good decisions for the future. So some really good inspiration there. Thank you. And of course, thank you to our show partners, to Gorilla Technology, HP Spark, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. And if you've been watching the live stream, then look out for NZ Tech Podcast through your podcast app, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And if you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you find us on the video platforms, whether it's following myself on LinkedIn, where we stream live most Tuesday afternoons, or through Facebook, X, and YouTube. Well, thank you, Pete.
Cheers, Paul.
Really great to have you on the show. If anybody wants to get in touch, are you reachable on
absolutely
on Twitter or X?
Yep, Panda Morgan on X, and or just email me. Panda.morgan@extra.co.nz. I'd love to hear from anyone. Anyone wants to come to the farm, it'd be a pleasure.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. All right. Well, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining us this week. We'll catch you again next week. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.